Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA. We are in week 2 of 2025, and it's cold outside. I'm Jessica Marshall here with another episode of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. Let's start off this episode with some State House news.
My fellow New Yorkers, as we reflect on the state of our great state, the Empire State, two things are very clear to me.
Governor Kathy Hochul delivered her annual State of the State address on Tuesday. She outlined priorities for this year's session.
Our future depends on the ability of every family to afford the essentials of life and our ability to protect the safety and security of our residents.
I went over to the Capitol this week after the address to connect with our own Dan Clark for some analysis of the governor's speech and what it could mean for New Yorkers this year. This is your 11th State of the State that you've covered. Let's just go right into it. Like, what's the top thing that you took away from this yesterday? The most newsworthy things?
I think the biggest thing for people to know that are middle income in particular are these tax cuts that Hochul is proposing. Now, her administration says that it's going to save taxpayers $1 billion, but we don't know what the new rates will be. We don't know necessarily which bracket is going to go lower and lowest, all of that good stuff. So we're waiting for the details in her executive budget next week. But until then, we kind of have to wait and see who is going to impact most. I think that's probably the one that people are going to be able to most easily understand and probably see in their paychecks too.
Absolutely. What else?
Well, I found this proposal actually very interesting and pretty high profile. So she wants to make community college free for people going for in-demand careers, and that involves things like nursing and engineering. Nursing is particularly important because we have a huge healthcare shortage and healthcare professional shortage in New York. It's just overwhelming to everybody. So to be able to have that option for people to enter that field, I think is going to be a big game changer.
Not journalism though, huh?
No, we're always going to have to pay.
Wrong field. Anyway, all right. So what else do we need to know about the State of the State? I know that, next week the budget will have a lot more revelations and a lot more realism about what's possible and what's going to happen this session. But what are some of the other things that we need to know?
Well, Hochul's really focused on what she calls affordability this year. It's really just the state's cost of living. So she's trying to find areas where she can bring that down for people. So that's where we get into the tax cuts. She's proposing an expansion of the child tax credit, for example, other incentives as well. So I would keep an eye out in the executive budget for our reporting on what those actual ideas look like. How are they going to be tangibly implemented? Because until we have that language in the legislation, we don't know exactly what it is. Right now, it's just a headline. So she's focused on affordability, and the second prong is public safety, especially in New York City. She's trying to really target that down with something called involuntary commitment, which is a term that refers to basically sweeping somebody off the street and taking them to a hospital if they exhibit signs of harming themselves or others. She wants to expand that to include being able to take somebody who can't meet their basic needs, including food and shelter. So it would be a very wide berth of options for them, and that has some civil rights concerns from lawmakers.
Absolutely. Now, she's just coming off the implementation of congestion pricing, obviously. So how's that kind of overshadowing all of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, she implemented congestion pricing at a lower rate than what was intended. So now the state has a revenue gap, not only because of that, but because the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in New York City, Mass Transit, has a budget deficit for what's called its capital plan, which is basically the repair, maintenance, and upgrades of the system. So they have to fill $2 billion there, and they don't know how they're going to do it. And $2 billion is a lot of money. Even though we talk about a $240 billion state budget, $2 billion is not easy to come up with.
It's not a drop in the bucket. No.
It's not. And every year we kind of do this little dance where the state has a budget deficit. We're trying to find money, and then somewhere in the first few months of the year, suddenly revenue from sales tax or something, income tax, is way higher than we expected. So really there will probably be a much smaller gap for lawmakers to fill, but we just don't know what it'll be.
Yeah, this is kind of a weird period, right? Like the period between the state of the state and the budget, where you're all kind of just like, okay, what's going to happen? No,
exactly. And another thing to keep an eye on is how much will the state budget increase in spending. Right now, as I said, it's about $237 to $240 billion. It's increased by at least a few $1 billion every year. So we should expect that, but we just don't know how much. In terms of, what the governor's trying to do is going to require more spending and less revenue. If she's going to enact those middle class tax cuts, that's $1 billion less for the state to use somewhere else. So there's a big question of how do we plug these holes and how do we raise what we need to raise to pay for what she wants to do.
In a couple of days, obviously, something big's going to happen in Washington, right? We're going to have the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump. How is, her priorities as she's stated them so far in the State of the State? How does that kind of fit in with that which is coming?
There's really two big things to keep an eye on there. First is the deductibility of state and local taxes, the SALT cap. That was enacted in the 2017 tax law during Trump's first term, and Republicans in Congress passed that. So that hurts some New Yorkers who have a lot of higher local and state taxes that they want to deduct from their federal taxes. So now they're trying to lift that cap, and Hochul made mention in her State of the State book that she wants to maybe help negotiate that, but really push them to do that to help residents here. The other thing that she's proposing, and actually has already enacted, is I believe it's called the Freedom Initiative, but it's a team of people that Hochul is putting together to basically brainstorm what the state's response would be if Trump goes after the state in terms of human rights concerns, what they would do there, if the state would sue, if the state would change state law to accommodate that. So those are the two big things that stand out, but it's also important to note that all of this funding, healthcare funding, education, the MTA, everything receives federal funding as well. So if the federal government reduces that, then the state either has to, step up or cut somewhere.
That is a lot of unknowns.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Anything else that you think is important to mention just for the average New Yorker at this point in terms of the legislative process, the priorities, any of that stuff?
Well, I will say this is Hochul's last chance to really convince voters that she is worth re-electing next year. This was the last chance to convince her own party that she should be the nominee next year. So if she doesn't do a good job this year in convincing her party that she's the right person, the chances of her facing a primary from somebody just gets higher and higher. So that's something to also keep an eye on.
All right. Thank you very much for the update. And I assume I will be talking to you after the budget as well.
Oh, yes, please. We'll have plenty to say.
For exclusive State House news and analysis delivered straight to your inbox on the daily, subscribe to our Capitol Confidential newsletter. You can head over to capitolconfidential.com, that's Capitol with an O, and sign up today. We are going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to hear a little magic happen here on the podcast. No, literally, we're going to talk to a magician.
Why is healthcare so expensive? What's happening with climate change? And are elections safe? You can find answers to those questions and a lot more with Capitol Confidential from me, Dan Clark. I give you the latest news and analysis from the state capitol and beyond. Sign up now at capitolconfidential.com. That's Capital with an O, confidential.com.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. Magician Ben Seidman wants to fool you. In a good way, of course. Whether it's sleight of hand, misdirection, or a false reality, Seidman is a seasoned performer who's worked with the likes of Criss Angel, Penn and Teller, and Morgan Freeman. Seidman is bringing his own magic show to Universal Preservation Hall in Saratoga on January 17th. Times Union digital producer Rick Marshall recently spoke to Seidman about his show. Here's their conversation.
Can you explain to me a little bit about the themes and maybe the origin of the Good Charlatan show that is coming to UPH?
Absolutely. So this is the show that I've been dreaming about for 16 years. I'm a professional magician. I tour performing at theaters, corporate events, colleges, private parties, things like that. What helped bring it to life in my mind was the fact that this is the dream show for me, what I would want to see on stage. The performance itself is about the intersection between good magic tricks and bad people in a way. There's so much overlap between magic and crime. It's just whether you're using your powers for good or for bad. Because when I look at like con artists and con games, pickpockets, things like that, there are these overlaps between the tools that they use and the tools that I use to entertain people. Because a magic trick might use sleight of hand, it might use misdirection, it could involve creating this false reality for people. And if you look at the old con games, well, most of them use sleight of hand in one way. If you look at pickpockets, they're constantly directing people's attention so that they can steal things from people. And then if you look at con artists, it's all about creating this false reality. So I got very interested in the overlap between what I do and what some of these people do. And the show was born from that combination and looking at how trust can be broken and also what happens when there is something that we are absolutely certain of that turns out to be wrong.
This is deep. I love it.
Thanks, Rick.
You got existential.
It's just the things that I've been pondering since 2008. You know, nothing big.
Well,
yeah.
You mentioned like the whole process of getting started in something. This is something that you've been wanting to do since you got interested in this. How did you get interested in magic and sleight of hand?
I mean, it's kind of a classic story. Someone pulled a coin out of my mom's ear when I was 6. And even as a 6-year-old, I was like, I don't know what that is, but I need more of that in my life. And ever since then, I started reading books on magic and learning everything I possibly could. And this ended up with me moving out to Las Vegas right out of college just to be around the magicians there. During my teenage years, I started inventing some of my own tricks and quickly realized that that was the way in for being successful in this industry. Both the performance elements being entertaining and original, but also just creating your own magic because it helped set me apart. So I started developing my own tricks in Vegas even more, and then ended up working as a consultant for this magic show called Criss Angel Mind Freak that was on A&E back in the day. And then that helped me get the job working as a resident magician at a casino in Las Vegas, and then things kind of took off from there. And then, at that point, I started doing TV appearances myself, doing magic on TV, which helped let people know who I am. And then, the touring started happening.
Your work on TV fascinated me, especially when I saw that you worked on Criss Angel Mind Freak, because part of me also just wants to see you and Criss Angel sitting down in a room and discussing things, because I would think that discussion would be fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit more about your work for TV? Because that's got to be a different environment from, doing stage magic.
Performing magic on TV is similar to doing it in real life, but it's also very different because the eye of the camera sees everything, right? You aren't able to misdirect the eye of the camera. And in a live situation, you might be able to move someone's attention around, as my good friend Apollo Robbins says, one of the great pickpocket magicians alive today, probably the best. As he always says, it's about moving people's attention around, and you can certainly do that in the live element, but when you're on TV on screen, it's different. So whenever I perform on a TV show, I will often redesign material or even develop specific material for the TV segment that can't be cracked on the rewind, right? If you see a live show where magic is happening and you rewatch it a couple of times, you might start to pick up on how something could be done, how something is done. And when I design magic for TV, when I'm performing on a TV show, I'm trying to design it so that it's as airtight as possible, meaning if you go back and rewind it and rewatch it a few times, you are still fooled. So that is the goal when I develop that material. And sometimes that's modifying existing magic that I've created. Sometimes it's inventing something from scratch, and it totally depends. And then there's the other element of magic on TV and film, which is consulting. I've certainly done this for other magicians, for some TV shows, for some films, even non-magic movies that needed to make something impossible happen, some practical effect. And that's always a fun, adventurous, exciting project.
I feel like that's got to be interesting to teach people who might not have the background, the experience, the skills that you have developed over years, how to make something look realistic. Films or TV shows that require someone to have a sleight of hand ability. What's that experience like?
Do you want a scoop, Rick? Do you want new information that hasn't been announced yet?
Sure.
Okay. This hasn't been announced yet, but I am a magic consultant for the upcoming Now You See Me 3 movie. These films that were made with, Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, Isla Fisher, Dave Franco, Morgan Freeman, the whole crew. It was a heist movie back in the day, and they're making the third one. And I spent 2 months in Budapest on set, helping develop some of the effects and also teaching the actors these magic tricks. So that was the most recent consulting project I've done. It was very exciting. It was challenging for so many reasons, because oftentimes in a movie, there might be one or two magic tricks that needs to happen. This had over 100. And so it was a big challenge, but very exciting and super fun, and really cool to get to go to Morgan Freeman's hotel room and talk to him about magic for an hour.
It's funny that you mentioned that film, because that's literally the scenes that appear in my head when I'm talking about teaching actors how to do amazing sleight of hand tricks and things like that are scenes from that franchise. Like, I'm very familiar with the Now You See Me films. Well, I was wondering if you might be able to give us a taste of some of the sort of tricks or sleight of hand that you people would see at the show. I was wondering if you might be able to give us a taste of what people might expect during Good Charlatan.
Oh, sure, certainly. I'm certainly not going to pick anyone's pocket on Zoom just because it's just me in here. And if I stole something from myself, I would totally know.
And if you stole it from me, I mean, that would be the most amazing trick ever.
Check your back pocket.
I'm going to jump back in here for a second. I just want to clarify that Rick and Ben were talking on a Zoom call. They're not in person together, which makes what happens next pretty interesting. You can see the full video of this trick and Rick Marshall's reaction to it on timesunion.com and on all of our social channels.
Rick, yes, I would be happy to do something for you. So for everyone who's watching as well, Rick, genuinely, have you and I prearranged anything? Did I ask you to think of a playing card before we started talking about this at all?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so we're going in cold. Nothing has been prearranged. You're positive?
Absolutely not. I didn't even know cards would be involved.
They are indeed, and I'm going to show you just a little miracle with a deck of cards, and I'm going to move my camera down so you can see. So, look, when you play cards, and I don't know, are you a card player yourself?
A little bit.
Okay, what's your game?
Solitaire.
Solitaire. Okay, that makes sense for a Zoom meeting. That's perfect. So look, this is a standard deck of cards. If I had you say stop as I went through these cards, you might be drawn to a specific playing card, right? You might think, oh, 4 is my favorite number. So that's actually not the fairest way to select a card. I could also deal through them and have you say stop, but that doesn't seem totally fair either, because I might mess with the timing in one way or another. So Rick, I want you to think of a playing card. Not the Joker, not the Ace of Spades. Don't make it obvious. Think of anyone you'd like. Do you have one in mind?
I do.
Okay, beautiful. Now, when you shuffle cards, you often keep them on the table so you can't see where any of the cards are. But I was performing recently for some very drunk people at a party. I was hired to be there, and someone took the cards and shuffled them together like this, face up into face down. I don't think they knew what they were doing, but it was chaos, because I took back the cards and they were, face up, because I looked down, I saw a sea of blue because of the backs. And it was this kind of awful, awkward moment. But I knew I had to do something. And luckily, Rick, I'm a wizard. So for the first time, will you tell us what was the card that you were merely thinking of?
The 8 of clubs.
The 8 of clubs. And that's a pretty random card, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Keep your eye on these cards. They're never going to leave the frame. Do you know if you saw the 8 of clubs as I was going through, whether it's face up or face down? Because that's the spades. Do you know if you saw it?
I don't know if I did.
Okay, listen, I don't know where the 8 of clubs is necessarily. However, I want you to tell me one thing. What color are the back of these cards, Rick?
Blue.
Blue. That's what most people would say, but actually this is a red deck of cards.
What?
Yeah, every single card in the deck is actually red, and now they're all facing the same direction. Every single card, Rick, except for one card in the dead center.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Ben Seidman is holding up an 8 of clubs.
So I love magic. I love giving people that feeling that you're feeling right now, and a combination of sleight of hand, misdirection, and creating a false reality really does bring these things to life. So I hope people come and see the show. It is genuinely what I've been thinking about and working on over the past 15 or so years. So I'm so excited to do it.
Ben, thank you so much for this chat, and thank you for blowing my mind. This was amazing. I was very skeptical that any magic trick could be pulled off via Zoom like this, and you just blew my mind.
Oh, thanks, Rick. I just hope that when you show this video, you're also able to include you in the frame so that everyone can see the look on your faces when that happened.
Again, you can see the full video of that magic trick, and mind you, there is no editing, I swear, at timesunion.com. Ben Seidman will perform his one-man magic show, The Magicians Guild Presents The Good Charlatan, at Universal Preservation Hall in Saratoga Springs on Friday, January 17th. One more thing before we let you go. It is one of our favorite times of the year here at the Times Union because it's when we kick off our annual Best of the Capital Region contest. And let me tell you, there are some exciting new categories this year, including Best Happy Hour, Best Drag Performer, Best Concert, Best Theater Performance, and Best Place to Bring Your Dog. To nominate your faves, head over to timesunion.com/best of 2025. Nominations start Monday, so get on it. That's it for this week. We will be back next week with another look inside our newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from Erica Smith and the Times-Union digital team. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks as well to Dan Clark and Rick Marshall for their contributions to this episode. Do you have questions or comments about The Eagle or any of the Times-Union's other podcasts? Don't be shy. Email us at podcast@timesunion.com. Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast driven by CDTA.